Well, good evening and welcome to the third NYPSD video. Well, good evening and welcome to the Pardon me, I just had a feedback issue there. So welcome tonight, and I want to just mention a couple of things to you. One of those things, many of you have gotten an invitation. Oh, well, many of you. Okay, I'm going to wait for just a few minutes here while we see if we can get some more participants going with the meeting. Okay. So it seems we've got 18 of us watching now. Okay, well, this is true. I guess we'll hope that they get the recording as part of that. And I just want to then go on and discuss with you the online portion of the course, the SPOC, Launching New Ventures. Many of you, actually you all should have gotten an email at the address under which you're registered to the NYPSD program, at your main email address. And that address is going to, that email is going to be coming from an address that you probably haven't seen yet. So you may want to check your spam folder. Just a minute here. I'm going to see if I can get the address that email is coming from. Yes, the link for the login for that course is something here. I'm going to see about putting it up. Just a minute here. And that link let me share my screen here and we'll get you going with the get you going with this, and let me see if I can get you claim on that. Okay. This is, let me just see if I can get this expanded a little bit without going over my, without having my, I have two screens here. I have the YouTube and I have a PowerPoint and the Zoom. So let's see here. What we've got is, this is, of course, the Ideas Initiative. And so, so this is the link of the address that you're going to be getting, you're going to be looking at for getting logged into the courseware. You should have gotten an email, and it comes from courseware@epfl.ch. So check your spam folder and see if you can find that email, because it did go out, I think it went out the end of last week. We have had about 60 people who've already signed up, and it is a process that you have to go through, and you have to create a new account. So when you click the link, it'll ask you to, it'll take you to a screen that either shows that you need to create a new account, or you sign on with an EPFL credential. Now that means that you don't want to be, you don't have an EPFL credential, so you will be better off just creating, you need to create a new account. That is the blue button that you'll need to use. And then it'll ask you for your particulars about your account information, and that will then allow you to sign in. And then you just go back to this link right here, courseware.epfl.ch, and you'll have the Launching New Venture course right there, and look for that, and then log in. That video does have videos. It has the videos, and it also has quizzes, things like that you need to take a look at. So what we're going to do now, just giving everybody a chance to look at that, and we will then go on, and I will talk about the subject. One of the things that we're going to want to do in the process of this program is we want you to develop an awareness of what is your business idea and what is your business plan. And we're not necessarily going to be asking you to generate a physical business plan document, but it's important for you to know all of the elements that you need to look at, because a business plan is not just something that people do for the fun of it. Believe me, it's not that fun to do. It's quite a bit of work, but it is something that it answers questions that investors have. And so you want to be clear on how you're addressing those questions, and make sure that you are getting to all the questions that investors will naturally have. So, what business plans do is they offer a structure and a clarity to the whole concept of your business idea. They allow you then to express the vision of your business idea and how it is unique from existing solutions. It tells not only investors, but it's also a good way for you to identify for yourself what's the business direction and how well it's aligned to your goals and to the needs of the market. So it functions as a roadmap, both for yourself, your teammates, the founding team, and it gives it's a better way to lay out your ultimate vision. Quite often, when people don't have a business plan, it appears from inside the company that there isn't a sense of vision. There isn't an overriding sense of purpose and guidance. And so this is important, that you need to have this both internally, and then of course, for people on the outside. If you're not able to effectively identify what is your value proposition, what's your market, how you're going to approach your market, then people who are potential customers, investors, suppliers, banks, people like that, they aren't as likely to trust you or to believe in you and in what you're trying to do. So it's this sense of going through the process of writing a business plan that will enrich and enhance the purpose that you're trying to express in your business environment. And of course, one of the things that helps your business along is getting investment. And it makes your company a much richer as far as an investment opportunity. And it allows you to help communicate that more clearly. So now then there's an example of this is that one investor said, so when I asked them about their business, they're vague, unfocused, and messy. They don't have their story straight or their product straight or a clear vision of where the company is going. Each individual member of the team has a completely different concept in their heads. And I can tell you that it's really important that you not only develop the business plan in your head, but you communicate that clearly to everybody in your team, and not just communicate it to them, but get them to communicate that back. Make sure that you're all telling the same story. Because if an investor talks to one person and hears one thing, or a customer for that matter, then here's different things from different people, it creates uncertainty and lack of confidence. So these are important things that you really need to assess. And so this slide is something that talks about the comparison of, is a business plan important? And certainly there have been a lot of businesses that have been founded without a business plan. And this, and it's not to say that you absolutely have to have a business plan. However, the chances of, growing your business or getting investment, or getting a loan is a big difference. Now you see that just, when businesses are designed to grow, they have to have a roadmap. And you need to believe the fact that if you think, oh, I can just grow organically where the opportunities present themselves, that's not going to end well. And here you see that, businesses that need to grow have, there are many more of those that when they start out and have this clear roadmap and clear definition, it helps them out. Now, of course, if you're going to be talking to investors, and a lot of companies need investors of any type, and we talk about the three types of investors. There's the first, which we call the 3 F's: the friends, family, and fools. Then you get into the stage of angel investing, which is people who are investing for the purpose of stimulating a certain industry and something that they usually have some personal knowledge in. And then you get into institutional investors, people like venture capitalists and very large scale investors. Many of the people that you will approach are people that you know, but they will want to see that you have a coherent plan for how to run your business. And having a business plan certainly gets you more traction in this area. And so this is one thing that really helps. And I can tell you also from personal experience, I've run a company for which I got investment and I also got loans. And the first thing that a bank will ask you for is, where's your business plan? We want to see a document. We want to see something coherent that tells us where you are going with this. And it gives something that will give them a sense of confidence and a sense of faith in your ability to carry out your business goals. And so you can see that there is a major amount of traction for having something that is concrete and structured. So what do you think the structure of a business plan should be? Now, first of all, I'm going to say that not all business plans look the same. The business plan is different depending on what its purpose is, who the clientele is, who the investment people are, and what type of business it is. A business plan for a service is going to look different than a business plan for a two-sided platform, is going to look different from a business for a one-sided platform. And so all of these things are going to look different. So I'm not going to say to you that there is one way that a business plan should look. You want the business plan to communicate your vision. So that means that it should be somewhat connected to the way you think, you speak, and how you want to be perceived. Quite often, you want the business plan to reflect the brand that you are trying to generate, the identity. And so for that reason, you can always, you can take certain liberties with a business plan. If you're trying to do something that is very, very modern and techie, then you may want your business plan to have a very, very sharp techie look. Versus if you're doing a business that for some reason should appeal to people who are more interested in old-fashioned things or historic things, you may want to have it look a little bit that way. So this is common with business plan. And so that is something that, is important to act as part of the communication tool that you have. So I'm just going to give you a sense of what are the elements of a business plan here. And of course, a business plan is intended to look very professional, and it's supposed to reflect the profession that you are aspiring to. And so for that reason, you generally have a cover page. You want it to clearly state what is the business, what is the name of the business, and have it clean and representative. So effectively, you want it to be like a book. Now you can have colors and styles and pictures, all sorts of things, but you want that to be coherent with the overall nature of the plan itself. So then you also have you want it to be navigable. Now, here we're talking again about a traditional business plan, and it should be something that a reader can easily understand. It is important to know that a document has to communicate to the reader for the intended purpose. And that means that you want it to be clear, and a table of contents is always the way to make things appear more clear, more concise, and lead the reader in their expectations. But now the thing you also want to make sure you do is you want to have an executive summary. So this is a major section in this, and I'll describe that later. And then you want a description of the company, you want a market analysis, your product service plan, basically the description of the company and, as I say, the product service plan. And again, the order of these items does not need to be linear. So the numbering may not be important. You may start with have a company description that also describes your product or service, and then talk about the marketing analysis and a marketing plan. Then you also want to talk about how your company is intended to operate, as well as you want to describe your management team, critical risks, and a financial plan. The financial plan should have a few numbers in it, but then all the big complicated spreadsheets, things that are not easy to read and that do not contribute to a narrative style, you should then put in the end of that plan in the appendix. Okay, so I'm going to just talk about a few of the elements that are coherent in a business plan, and then let me get a bit more light going here. And so what you'll have is, the first part and one of the most important parts is the executive summary. And the executive summary should really be very brief. This isn't, the reason we call it an executive summary is because this is something that an executive would read and be able to read just 2 pages, 1 to 2 pages, and it would tell the essence of what the plan is. So it's not a preview. It is an encapsulation of the entire business plan, but only in 2 pages. Now, this is something that's very difficult to do. And usually you write the executive summary at the very end of the process. So don't try to work so hard to get everything into 2 pages in the beginning. You're better off leaving this to be the last part of your explanation. So what is an executive summary? It is a clear, comprehensive, and complete summary of the business, not just what the business is, but what the product does. And it describes the entirety of the new venture. So keep in mind, you tell people everything about what is the company, and it describes the unique features and benefits of your proposed service. You always have to be concerned about how do you make your product, how is your product different? How do you differentiate your product from others? And how do you convince a customer to use your product instead of others? And then you also need to say, you talk about your product or service, but then you also need to talk about the other side. What is the market plan the market segment that you're addressing, and what is your plan for getting into that market segment? So you want to, you really talk about that. What is your target, and how do you intend to hit that target? And then you need to maybe talk about, how much money you're going to need in order to do this. And so this is something that you want to be very clear and concise about. And if you're doing an executive summary for the purpose, or if you're doing a business plan for the purpose of gaining investment, then don't be shy of saying, well, we're going to need 30,000 in order to execute the first year of our operation, or something like that. Put a hard number on it, and don't be apologetic about that. But make sure that you've got your facts straight. So let's talk about that a little bit more. The key element of your business plan is your value proposition. It is clear, and it demonstrates the value of your product over and above existing offerings. And this is a way that this is what gains you and your product and your company competitive advantage. If you don't offer some competitive advantage, then somebody who might want to invest in your company will say, well, but if you're just the same as this other company or this other service, then they're not likely to implement, to invest in you if you don't have some promised advantage. So that's what you have to look at for the value proposition. But the value proposition also has to have some promise of having traction. So it has to be able to grip in the market. So what does that mean? That means that if you show that you have a value over some other product, you also have to demonstrate that that value is not just something you imagine, but it is clearly demonstrated. There's a clearly demonstrated need in the market, and that the people experiencing that need or the market for that solution is large enough to support the company. And you also have to show that there is some sense of testing, and that you have gained experience and become informed from talking with real potential customers. But then in fairness, you also should, when discussing what your value proposition is, you also should discuss why it is superior or why it gives customers advantage over existing solutions, substitute products. So we talk about the principle of substitution, and that is that you may have a walking stick that is also a shovel, but if somebody carries a walking stick and a shovel, then they have substituted your product. And so you want to make sure that you have you've examined this and it can explain why your product offering is better than all of the combination of things that are substitute products. And I'll discuss that a little bit later on in this presentation. And so then we need to look in more depth at the market. This is a market analysis. And in a market analysis, you understand in which market the company operates. And in that sense, you have to look at the overall market size and talk about how large the market is. And then you need to estimate what share of that market you are going to address. And it is very, very rare that you can address the large market size. As an example, in 2006, when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, he didn't have a demonstration model. He simply said, Apple is going to make an iPhone, is going to make a phone. And he pointed out that people had multiple items in their pockets. So he looked at the substitution principle. And he said that, he pointed out that if people are carrying around a mobile phone that wasn't a smartphone, an iPod that was for playing their music, and things like a Palm Pilot or some other device that was acting as a personal organizer, and you could put all of that in one thing, then it was a great advantage over those substitutions. And many people immediately saw the value in that. But Steve Jobs talked about what is the overall market in mobile phones. And in 2006, it was quite large. And he said, this is a $10 billion a year annual market. And Apple wants to capture 1%, 1/100th of that market, which would still mean Apple would be capturing $100 million a year, I think. Yes, $100 million a year in market share. So that is something that would, certainly appeared to be a very credible market analysis. Yes, if Apple could capture 1%, well, the funny thing about that was Steve Jobs wildly underestimated the success of the iPhone. And I think we all have seen how important that success has been. In any case, he understood what the overall market size was and what he felt he could comfortably capture in that amount of market. And so a market plan should demonstrate the market dynamics. So you don't just want to look at what is the market today, but you also may want to identify what is the growth potential. And more opportunity exists in a market that is growing, because nobody can usually capture all of that growth themselves. So if you identify that, yes, we are entering a growing market because we ultimately want to address the market at this point, and by the time the market grows, we will be there to meet it. And so you want to know what is the market dynamic, how it's growing. You certainly generally don't want to be going into a market that is declining, but make sure that you understand what the financial aspects of the market are. We generally measure the market changes in financial terms. We talk about the market capital. So how much money is flowing in this specific market sector? And then you need to prove that there's a strong match between the product or service that you're offering and the market you're intending to address. So that is an important thing to keep in mind. The market is, you want to meet the market. And that is that is an important thing. Also looking at your customer base, because the market is both expressed in terms of large financial measurements, but you also have to look at the profile of the consumers within that market. And you want to make sure that the people that you are selling to are actually the people who can afford to pay for your product and have the demonstrated need for it. So market can be expressed in multiple ways. You look at either the people or you look at the financial sums of it. And so always keep in mind what market elements you are trying to address. So another important thing to look at in a market analysis is the competition. And generally speaking, there's always competition. And if the risk is, if you do not address your competition in the marketplace, people are likely to perceive you as being as not having a clear picture of what your market actually looks like, because I guarantee you do have competition, and that's going to be what you're looking at. And so right now, so just to clarify, the market analysis, because I see Suleiman, yes, the market analysis is, yes, it's your customers, why they use your product, how many of them need the product and can pay for it. Now, the the how we can reach them is more about the execution, and we'll get to that later. So, but generally, yes, you are correct. It's about understanding who your customer is, how many of them there are, how much money there is that you can capitalize off, and and how safe you are in those assumptions. Okay. And part of this is, of course, you're going for this market, but so is the competition. And you need to look at all competitors. So you have, and in this analysis, you want to detail and address all competitors. And so you have direct competitors. Now, I had a friend one time who said, "Oh, I've been advising a company in Lausanne, and they are the only restaurant in downtown Lausanne that serves pizza by the slice." And she said, "It's wonderful. They have no competitors." Now, let me ask you, do you think that is true? Because she said nobody else sells pizza by the slice. They have no competitors. Well, they have no direct competitors, but they do have indirect competitors. So who are the competitors of a company that sells pizza by the slice? Well, companies that sell whole pizzas, companies that sell sandwiches, companies that sell hamburgers, that sell whole, sit-down restaurants are also the competitors, but also so are the supermarkets, the stores where people can buy a loaf of bread, some pieces of cheese, and some roast beef, and slap together their own sandwich. Or they can buy a frozen pizza and take it to their office and put it in the microwave oven. So those are all indirect competitors. And these are important things to look at. And it's very important to try and make sure that you expand your view of who is your indirect competitor. Because again, this comes into substitution. Direct competitors match your product one-to-one, but indirect competitors offer substitutes that people could use instead of your product, that they can use in place of it, and that would make it so that they don't need your product. And that is an important thing to remember. So always look at who are your indirect competitors. Then the third category of competitors are the ones that don't exist yet. And with those, you're going to run into, people who are opportunistic competitors. If you develop a market share, then more companies are going to come into that market. And so, for instance, as soon as Apple announced the iPhone, Samsung decided, wow, we need to address this market as well. And they started competing in the smartphone market. And so this is an important thing to look at. Now, yes, Suleiman has a good question. Can we apply the SWOT in the competition analysis? Yes, you can, because if you look at a SWOT analysis, which if you remember from the last webinar that I gave, it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, you can both look at your competitors as in relation to what are your strengths and weaknesses, not what the competitors' weaknesses are, but you can say, well, as our strength, we have patents, or we have specific elements that none of our competitors have. And, so you can do that. Now, if you find that your competitors have a better distribution network, then this is also than you do. That so this is not necessarily that you are faced with this in general, but you have to look at what your weaknesses are. And if you know that in general, relative to your main competitors, you do not have the expertise in a supply chain that your competitors do, then certainly that is a weakness. And so remember that the strengths and the weaknesses are about the qualities of your company internally. So it is yes, relative to the outside environment, but it's commenting on what your company has that is superior to or inferior to those of your closer competitors. And then, of course, the other part of a SWOT analysis is opportunities and threats. Now, this is someplace where threats could be from potential competitors. You don't necessarily know that there is a competitor in there, but you can use that. You can say that is a potential threat if you have a larger competitor coming in and interfering with your market. So yes, you can use a SWOT analysis, and a SWOT analysis is one tool that helps you. But keep in mind, it's not the only tool. And a SWOT analysis is a way of diagramming and then analyzing this. But just like the business model canvas is a tool to help you understand where your customers, where your resources are, and all these things, the SWOT analysis or the business model canvas, neither of those is what fully expresses your business. What's important to do is to do that and then think about what it tells you and the story that you can tell about it. I always say that the SWOT analysis and the business model canvas are great tools, but if I ask you to build me a house, I really don't want you to show me a hammer. So the tool isn't important, it's what you do with the tool. And so this is where you can figure this helps point you in a direction of analyzing your competitors, but don't let that limit you to just that tool. And certainly take the output and let that guide you, and let your own logic reinforce that. And so it is important to look at your competitors and the assessment process. Yes, it's helpful to use a SWOT analysis for that. And then what you need to do is you need to project their market share and analyze their strategy for pursuing the market. Because you may find that there's an opportunity for the fact that their strategy doesn't address a certain customer segment. Or you may find that their market share that they are capturing doesn't equate to the whole market. So if there's an unaddressed market or some way that they are failing to take advantage of it, then those are opportunities. And it's important to really look at not just who your competitors are, but what they're doing it and how they're doing it, and how they are capitalizing on their customer segment. So you want to look at that. And this can be a very informative activity, because in a lot of situations, you will want to, if they're doing something well, you want to imitate them or just copy what they're doing. So don't try and reinvent the wheel. If they know what they're doing, but for some reason they're just not doing it in the right market area with the right methodology, then improve on it. But if they're doing it well, then learn from it. And this is a cornerstone to business, and that imitation is the best form of flattery. If somebody's doing something well, then learn from it. And that is the cornerstone of all, business practices. We have to keep learning. And part of the danger that we face is that we by doing something well, we are giving part of our recipe away to the competition. And so this causes us to also be very much aware that we have to continually innovate and continue to strive to be better and to do a better job of it. And so, at this point, we are, Manal, I will tell you what, I'll talk about customer persona a bit later in a different part of this, but you always want to be refining your customer persona. You always want to be, fine tuning who is your customer, and part of learning about who is your customer is to look at your competition and look at who their customer is. And if your customer is not their customer, if you need to capture a different market segment, a different market share, then study who their customer persona might be and differentiate the persona from their persona. So if you get that, it's a way to turn that around a little bit. And then, one thing you want to look at when you talk about the competition is an element of barriers to entry. Now, barriers to entry are things that make it harder for any new person or new company to enter the market. Many barriers to entry are in legislation. So if the law says that the phone company is, there only is going to be one phone company in the area, then it's pretty hard to start up a new phone company. Now, likewise, a phone company has infrastructure that it's built. It has a huge set of wires going everywhere. And in fact, that was for quite a long time something that caused phone companies, before the mobile phone revolution, phone companies got to be somewhat stagnant. They weren't innovating enough. They figured, this is good enough, and we don't have any competition. And that caused a lack of development in the hardwired phone service. And then you got the mobile phone revolution. And all of a sudden, you didn't have to string kilometers and kilometers of cables and attach a cable to every single customer's house and office and all of these things. And so all of a sudden, you could put up a few cell towers, and that would allow you to compete and overcome the barrier to entry that the phone companies previously had. So this is, a way to look at a barrier to entry. Now, there are also other types of barriers to entry that may be that, given the number of potential customers there are, your main competitor has most of them locked up in service contracts that they can't get out of. Now, this is not necessarily a law that limits them, but these customers have high switching costs. And so, one barrier to entry can be, as I say, switching costs, in that it costs people to switch. And one example there was that of razors, and that you would buy the handle for your razor, and the blades were not that expensive. But if you had to switch and you had to buy a new handle for a razor, then that was a switching cost. Now, how did the razor blade companies deal with that? Well, they started giving away the handle. And at that point, it reduced the switching cost, and it actually took away the switching cost. So that was one thing, that's an example of removing or obviating, making a barrier to entry irrelevant. But you can get situations where, you find that you have some ability to create a barrier to entry. So one of the barriers to entry that is codified in law is patents. So if you have a patent specifically is a barrier device. A patent gives you the ability to forbid somebody else to use your invention. And so patents are a great example of barriers to entry. So keep this in mind. Look at what the limitations are in, the things that would be stopping you. Now, some of the barriers to entry are just that you have to spend a lot of money in order to develop the manufacturing facilities or the distribution network or any of these things. And so think about what are the obstacles, what are the hurdles that you have to overcome in order to get your sense of how you will capture that market relative to the competition. So yes, you see, telecom companies are a classic instance of barriers to entry. And so, that is one thing. Now, and in fact, one of the landmark cases of that was in the US. There was the only telephone company in the US was American Telephone and Telegraph, the Bell Corporation. And back in the 1970s, the government decided, well, that company is a monopoly, and we're not going to allow monopolies because monopolies tend to be bad for the consumers. If you own all the telephone lines in the country, then you don't have any competition. You can put the price wherever you want it to be. So they ended up breaking what they called Ma Bell into a whole bunch of baby bells. They had Southwestern Bell, New England Bell, all these different Bell companies, and they split it up into separate companies who ended up competing with each other. And so, this was one of the things that they ended up seeing. And so telecom companies tend to be one of the great examples of barriers to entries. And that's one thing that Suleiman pointed out. Now, Al-Hajri, asked, yes, is it a barrier to entry if you have a limited budget compared to your competitors? Yeah, money is a way of throwing up barriers. And it's quite common that a company will create a barrier to entry if it feels threatened. So if a company, if you come in and you say, well, I can offer this product at a better price than my competitor, but then if your competitor has tons and tons of money, then all they have to do is sell their product at a loss and sell it at a rate that undercuts your ability to pay. If this is your cost of production and this is your price point, and your price point comes in at first here, below the competitor. But if the competitor can bring their price point below your cost of production, even if they're losing money, then that is a barrier to entry. They will starve your company to death. And so this is something you have to be concerned about. So in some places, there are laws that prevent this, that a company can't sell at a loss, but that really does require a lot of legal battles. And yeah, and that's that's the troublesome thing about it, is that sometimes the monopolies are government sponsored. And if you cannot break that dominant position, then you really don't have much chance. And so trying to compete with a government monopoly is not a very good idea. And quite often, because government feels that it is in a position to be governing, if you try and offer a service that is supplementary to the government and what they're offering, then you're going to find resistance. So what we call a B2G, or business to government business model, is usually a very difficult way to start a business. And there are many companies that sell services to governments, but it usually takes a long time, and you need to be well established for the government to be willing to trust you in that. So those are some challenges that you will see. And yes, they are barriers to entry. And you have to be aware of when your competition has fewer barriers to entry, and keep that in mind, and it will help you out. And ideally, if you can create your own barriers to entry, and one case in point for that was the company Kareem. Now, they spent a year and a half working diligently to get the laws changed and legislation tailored to a point that it fit very well with their business model. And because of that, Kareem was in a position that it became tremendously valuable for companies that needed to enter that marketplace. And so, for instance, Uber realized they couldn't enter the Arabian market, but that Kareem had that entry already. So it was much more valuable for them simply to pay a tremendous amount of money to buy Kareem. And that was very successful on behalf of the founders of Kareem, who made a tremendous amount of money. So you see, this is where you can use barriers to entry to your benefit, and ultimately it can reward you in those ways. But be very conscious of what the barriers are that you're facing, and how you can either avoid those or use those to your benefit. Okay, and then we talk about the route to market. So we talked about the market analysis, but then you have to talk about how are you going to approach that market, address that market. And so again, your route to market has to be clear and comprehensive. And you have to give some credible analysis on how you will assess the selected target market. And I'll caution you that here's where you generate a lot of personas, you try and refine those, but the best way to do that is to ask consumers. One of the main failings that entrepreneurs do, and I've seen this myself, I might even say I have done this myself, entrepreneurs tend to market to themselves. So they think, I have a problem that I'd like a solution for. And therefore, because I need this solution, there are other people who need this solution. There must be other people. When in fact, the other people don't see that as much as they might think. And the danger is, and as Chris pointed out when he talked about in design thinking, you have to know how to interview people and what questions to ask. And so that is, you have to look at, be careful about how you ask those questions. and you don't want to lead people. Now, I can give you my personal experience multiple times where I have gone and done market research and found that ultimately the people who I had talked to and who, in a community, and I had asked them, well, what if we offered this service? And they all said, oh, this is wonderful. We'd love to have that service. We need it in this area. But then when I did offer that service in that area, those people who said it would be wonderful were never people who would come and pay for that service. They liked the thought of it, but they didn't ultimately feel they needed to pay for it. So this is something that you have to be careful of. And I'll go into that a little bit later and give you one way you can address that. So I noticed that Salim has a couple of questions. If you want to enter a market with very little competitors or few competitors, and so if there are very few competitors, one of the things, if you think, well, there's no barrier to entry in this market and there are no competitors, I think that is either A, a very opportune market, or B, maybe there's not a market there at all. Now, sometimes you have people, and I'm not saying that people can't be visionary and see there is this market that is going to grow, but right now people don't see it. And if you see that, and if you can demonstrate it, then this is something that is really good to look at. But this takes, they do happen. But they tend to be rare. If you can capture that, wow, go for it. But be very careful, because quite often, if there's not a market, if there's either no solution to a market or there's just not a market, again, as I said, that might be the arrogance question. Why is there nobody going into that market area? And one of the problems that we quite often see is that you don't hear about the people who failed, who tried and failed at it, because the people who failed, the companies that failed, aren't around any longer, so you can't see them. Sometimes doing historical searches and finding out if somebody offered something like that previously is a way for you to get that information. But you need to be careful and really try and dig for, where did people go wrong previously? And those lessons really help. But yes, and in a competitive landscape, anything that you can do to create barriers to entry is really helpful. And that's why I say one way to do it, if you have an invention, is to develop a patent. The patent allows you to say legally for a period of 20 years, no, you can't use this. I can only use this invention. So that's one example. Another one, I hate to say it, but it happens quite often enough, is that people then see if they can start a business and get the government to make laws that effectively make only that business the preferred provider. So these are some things that you might think, so basically that's what I'm saying, is that you can try and create barriers against your competitors. That tends to be difficult. Most governments believe that free trade and having a level playing field is that's the economist's way of looking at things, but it is something that you can do. But there are other barriers to entry. If you create a distribution network that is better for people, easier for people to access, then you have created a barrier of entry for your competitors. Everything that you do better is ultimately some form of a barrier to your competitors. And so that's something that you want to look at. Okay, so now getting back to your route to market, you want to make sure that you challenge the assumptions and that you really find the truth in what lies in the market. And when you talk about how you're going to approach your market, you need to explain what your scope is. Are you going to address the whole market, and what is your plan of attack? Well, usually trying to address an entire market, because the market is diverse, ends up in being something that has very low traction. Something that, if you're just doing something that's generic, it doesn't address people. So what you want to do is say, okay, who do we want? Who are, and this is where we get into this is where you get into your personas. And who is our ideal persona? And are there enough of those people? That's what you've done in your market analysis. And so then you decide, let's try and market specifically to this persona. And then you can broaden it. You can identify different personas and tailor your marketing in that direction. So your marketing should address the personas that you're developing. And that is your route to market. And so you have to decide when you're doing it. Is it good? At what point is it good to enter the market? Timing is very important. Things like, timing is important. If you're actually opening a physical location, things like traffic flows and parking is tremendously important. Sorry, cleaning crew trying to come in here. So you need to really be clear, not just on how, but how big and when. And there are different ways to do it as well. So, one thing to think about, what we're thinking about more and more often these days is not just social media advertising, but identifying influencers, people who can spread the word and that allow that word to be, that act as trusted sources. So this is one way that market approaches are changing in the new media age. So keep that in mind and think about all the different timings and approaches. And of course, timing is also important with influencers, because if you think, oh, well, I'm just going to do this on April 1st, but then you find out that you're going to rely on a key influencer, that influencer has an agenda, has a schedule of their own. And so you need to collaborate with them and find out what timing works well for both of you. Because if you try and push them, then the influencing you are going to get is not going to be very good. So, think of these things. And it's not just your timing, but it's timings in the market and opportunity timings. So, and this is what brings into your overall marketing and communication plan. Now, your business plan doesn't have to be an exact schedule. It's a plan. It is a roadmap, but in which you say, okay, I'm going to use Snapchat and Twitter, and then I'm also going to use a Facebook page for my main marketing, landing page. So you may decide to do that. You may, in fact, decide you're not even going to develop your own website, and in fact use these tools for yourself. But you also have to think about what limitations that imposes. But you don't just pick channels and say, oh, well, that sounds like a nice one. you need to identify why those channels are relevant. And I have a good story about that. And that when I had a business, I wanted to advertise on television. Now, this was 20 years ago, and that was when television advertising was a very good way to reach people. But I wanted to advertise because I had a business that spoke to a historic clientele. I thought, I want to advertise on the History Channel. But luckily, my marketing agent said, I'm not going to let you do that because that's a channel that's watched by a lot of old men because it's mostly about wars. And he said, who are the people who call you up and make reservations? And I said, well, it's usually a woman between 45 and 65. And he said, yeah, then you need to be on the Food Network because that's what they're watching. So this is a way to think about not just what channel you want to be on, but how is that channel relevant to the personas you're trying to attract. And so these things are really important. And then it's always important to have a clear picture of what the costs are. You don't necessarily have to say exactly what your spend is going to be on that, but if you can indicate that you have researched it and you know that the influencers that you're targeting generally ask 1,000 rial for a positive tweet, or that a Facebook campaign will cost roughly 2,000 rial to reach all of the Oman market. These are things that you might want to think about. And then what's a good thing to do when you talk about your route to market is to make a fallback plan. So understand that if your main channel doesn't generate the traction that you're looking for, think about how to, what would be your next step. And I can guarantee you, if you work out this plan, if you have a fallback plan for what happens if things go wrong, what happens if Snapchat, if your plan is based on Snapchat and Snapchat goes bankrupt? Yeah, so you need to think about that. You want to have a reserve plan. And I can guarantee you that by going through that planning process, you will be more agile in the event that something does go wrong. And usually there is something that goes wrong. So having spent that time planning is a useful exercise for the survival of your business. And then while this isn't necessarily vital to do, it's a good exercise, again, sort of in the fallback plan, is to look at your risk analysis. So risk is, of course, there are plenty of things that you don't know, but there are also things that you do know about that could be problematic for you. So if you're operating in a place, in an environment where patents and things of that nature are important, then you will want to do due diligence to make sure you have freedom to operate. You also want to get expert advice. Ask experts in the field if they can see any risks that you're facing. And then you also want to make sure that your critical assumptions, those things that you really are counting on being important, are included and they're wholly supported, and that your milestones are attainable. So and this is where, if you haven't already done it, a SWOT analysis, but in doing that analysis, you have an analysis of the actions that mitigate all of the identified risks. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and especially threats, everything that is in the threats category, you don't just say it's a threat, but you have some explanation of what you will do in the event that threat arises. Okay, so Suleiman has just talked about, is it fair to summarize that you, you check the status of your product and you compare your product to the competitors. Yes, you so you check monthly to look at the foot traffic. Yeah, I mean, traffic is important. Anything, this is, of course, if you're looking at something like a retail or something like that, you want to find some way to measure the intensity of your market. And now you're always going to be looking at your top competitors. Do you need to do it every quarter of a year? I know people who do it daily in business. That may be too much. It depends on what the market is, but it's always important to have some mode of environmental scanning where you're both looking at the progress of your competitors and looking at at the new entrants in the market. But now this is all. What I'm talking about here is the premeditation, the going into the business. Then these are things that you really have to think about. This is a way to monitor your business once it's existing. And so the thing that I will, I say is, that it is, it's a way of aligning your assumed trajectory and with the needs of the market. So yes, in a way, Ali, you're saying, does it match the customer journey? And yes, you do need to make sure that you're looking at the persona in that sense and you're identifying that. But the customer journey is also something that you look at in the prototyping phase when you're actually talking about your product. And then let me just finish with the business plan part, because this is a business plan. Now, I'm of the opinion that you write a business plan before you launch your business. Guy Kawasaki had a famous statement, which was, being an entrepreneur is like jumping off a cliff and building the airplane on your way down. And I find that statement to be tremendously insulting to entrepreneurs, because every entrepreneur that I know of has effectively built the plane at the top of the cliff, and the business plan is building the plane. And then once you push that plane off the cliff, you're doing everything you can to make sure it flies. So the business plan is done. Once you've pushed it off the cliff, that then effectively the business plan process is over. Because when you're an entrepreneur and you really jump off with your plane, with your plan, you are working as hard as you can just to keep it going. So I advise you to think of a business plan as a good foundational document, but it's not something that you need to revise regularly. And we'll talk about this a different process as we go on. But you might want to think about your financial requirements, get an understanding of what is it going to cost to found your venture, what are some of the costs you're going to incur in the first year. And you want it to have some financial contingency plan with some what ifs. What we usually do when we're doing a business plan is we think about, what is the best case? If we got the ideal number of customers, what would that be? And then if we look at the worst case, if we figure we're going to capture 10% of the market, and that's our base case, and we say we want to target 10% of the construction market in Oman. But it turns out that, but then we have to say, okay, what if we only capture 1% of the market? And then you look at what your operating revenues are and what your growth, what the market growth is and things like that. But then you also say, okay, and what if we capture 20% of the market? So you want to have usually a business analysis has 3 cash flow curves, one for the normal case, one for the best case, and one for the worst case. And so it's basically best case is usually the top line, worst case is the bottom line, and then the normal case goes somewhere in the middle. And so these things, you should at least know how much money do you need to have in order to pay the bills. This is, sort of your cash break even. What amount do you need to sell in order to survive? And so think about those things. But for a novel business, for a starting out business, that's something that you can just do in very general terms, but try and be accurate on that. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to just talk about what are some of the challenges with business plans. So, as I said, I'm in favor of doing business plans, but some people have said that a business plan is essentially a research exercise written in isolation at a desk before an entrepreneur has even begun to build a product. Well, in part that's true, but you can change that. You can make it different. And so I want you to think about how you can change this. And in this sense, you have, there is the traditional critique that there's very little learning that goes on the business plan. Well, what's an alternative way to do that? One of the things that you need to think about is that business plans rarely survive first contact with the customer. This is true. And that's fine. The business plan is not going to be it's not going to be something that you are going to follow step by step. It gives you the planning in your mind and within your team to understand that this is our goal. And then at least we have an idea. We're not meeting that goal or we're exceeding it. And that gives you some steering. And no one, basically, it's true that you don't need to look at 5 years into the future. Traditional business plans call for a 5-year projection, and nobody needs that. You're not going to know what your business is going to do in a year. But the longer you look out into the future, the less accurate your projections are going to be. And so then what we have is that, and also business plans tend to be, yes, in a way, a look at a larger company. This is both positive and negative. I can absolutely guarantee you, if you want your company to grow, at some point in the early stages, you have to imagine it as potentially being a larger company. But you don't need to make a business plan so stringent and so detailed that it becomes overburdening to you. Now, Salim asks, let's say I'm in early to enter the market before other competitors. And can you have a successful business without having a business plan? Yes, you can. I'm not saying you had to let the business plan be a ball and chain that holds you down. A business plan, a lot of people spend time thinking about it before they launch because they want to make sure, and that's one way to do it. But this leads into what is a lean startup. So I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes here about the lean startup methodology. And this is basically, you envision the venture, you generate business model hypotheses, you test the hypothesis using a minimum viable product, and you either pivot, perish, or you get to product market fit. And so the idea here is that you do an iterative process. You make iterations. And so as this diagram implies, it goes in a circular motion and it relies on experimentation. So here are the guiding principles of the lean startup methodology. And so I'm going to spend the next few slides going over this. So Let's talk about minimum viable product. It is the most basic configuration of your product. So it should not have all the bells and whistles and features that will make it the ultimate great product. It should demonstrate at least one feature that differentiates it. And it should, more features will come later on, but keep it simple, make it very basic. And you select the feature or features that are most likely to attract your first customers, your target personas, your early adopters. So early adopters quite often don't need all the features. They just want this one important one. And so think of a minimum viable product as a beta test version, that thing that you send out to the first people, and then use this to get quick feedback. So mock up a product, send it out, get people to use it. Don't charge them for it if you need to do that. Give it to them, say, hey, I'm giving it to you for free. Tell me how I can improve it. Get their feedback, and don't overthink your minimum viable product. Make it fast, make it clean, make it efficient. That's the key that you want to work on. And so then but the thing that helps you is what we call the 5 whys. Let's say you've gotten the feedback and you've identified what you think is a problem. Well, often what happens is we focus on the symptoms and we believe that those are the problems. So if you say, oh, well, the product's not working, that's a problem. No, that's a symptom. There's low customer satisfaction. This is a problem for the company. No, it's a symptom that there's something wrong. And there's inferior product quality. That's a problem. No, it's a symptom that there's a failure somewhere in the manufacturing process. And so the key in this is to ask why. And then you ask why again. So the product's not working. Why? Well, this wheel and that wheel are getting in the way of each other. Well, why? Well, they're both the wrong size. Well, why? Well, we needed the wheel to be this sized in order to interact with that other part. Well, and then keep going, and you keep asking why until you get to the root of the problem. So do not look at a symptom and then think that's a problem. So, think about if your doctor just looked at a symptom and immediately jumped to the problem. Oh, you've got a sore throat? Let's give you chemotherapy because it sounds like it could be a symptom of cancer. No, that's not the way to do things. This is the fundamental element of the lean business, the lean startup methodology. You have to burrow down into each problem. If you're going to take the time to get your customers' feedback, you need to dig into it and make sure that you understand exactly what that feedback means. So these are the important things that you need to look at. And that's why they talk about validated learning process. You apply the MVP, you receive the feedback, you ask the whys, you address the root of problems, you measure the effects. Part of validating your problems and the effects is measurement. It's important to not just say, oh, well, we need to make it better. Set a goal. Say, we need to make it this much better. We need to increase our efficiency by this much. Set a number on it. Make it measurable. And then make the decision. Use the learning through this process to make that decision. And yes, we talk about the 5 whys because usually this is the number of times. It may only be 3, it may be 6, it may be 7. But the key is to continue to ask why until you get to a point where there's no more question about it. This is the problem. So, just be sure that if you ask why, that why is answered by the question you're looking at. So these are the things that you need to keep in mind. So no, I'm not saying you can only ask why 5 times, but try and really dig in. That's important. And so then the other principles we talk about here are pivot, small batches, and continuous development. So pivoting may be fine-tuning, or it may be massively reconfiguring the product or the business model. So a pivot can be just pretty much, wow, this idea isn't working. Let's either go for a different market with that idea, go for a different market with a different idea. Sometimes pivoting means completely abandoning the business, or that at that point it's perish. But be willing to do that. And, so because if you're willing to change, then you're more willing to, accept the possibility of evolving your business. Just to restate, good question, Ollie. MVP is minimum viable product. It's the minimum product that will demonstrate the efficacy of your business proposition or your value proposition. So it's the most basic product that your business may offer. And you can add features later. So anyway, getting back to these things, and pivot is something that you do and try to adjust. It may be small, it may be a massive thing. But because you're always looking at learning and pivoting, the best way to do that is to run in small batches. Because if you order, let's say you're doing something like making a watch, and I can tell you because I know the guy who made this watch. He's a friend of mine, and he says that the minimum order quantity for a series of micro machine parts is 3,000 units. And so when he first designed this watch movement and had his watchmakers making it, he didn't order mass-produced parts. He had them made themselves. It cost him more to do that per unit. Each watch that he made cost much more to do. But in that process, he learned. And so he didn't end up having a part made. Well, minimum order quantity is 3,000. So having 3,000 parts, making 200 watches, and then finding, oh no, this doesn't work. Now we have to throw out 3,000 parts, or 2,800 parts in that example. And because of doing this, you make small batches, you discover, you do an incremental iteration process. So you make small changes along the way. And by doing this, by making your iterations small and working through them, it actually reassures your customers. Your customers see that you're making things better bit by bit. As opposed to saying, okay, we're making this product and this is the product. And then the customer say, yeah, but it doesn't really have it doesn't work quite right. And then you say, oh, well, you're going to have to wait a year until we get our version 2.0 done. This is why software companies, for instance, have version 10.1.5.333, because they know that it's important to keep iterating and making themselves more responsive. So, your company becomes more responsive when the iterations are short and ongoing. So this is one thing that you can do, and having this philosophy to do that is a way to be successful. And then there is the concept of the Andon cord. Now, this comes from Japanese manufacturing and the lean manufacturing and total quality management principles. In this case, it is a mechanism or an understanding that anybody who sees anything wrong can, in the old days, pull a cord, and that would stop everything in the factory. Because the problem would be in older factories that, oh, somebody sees something wrong, doesn't do anything about it. Or maybe they say, oh, well, we'll have to do that, take care of that tomorrow. And the problems just pile up and pile up. But by making it so that when there's a problem, everything stops, then everybody is not just standing there watching the line when it stopped. Everybody concentrates on how do we solve this problem. And this is an effective way, because quite often in a small company, it's especially good, instead of saying, oh, well, that's his department, and Tilo takes care of the software issues. There are all sorts of things to be done. Yes, maybe you have a coder who's working on coding, but then you also have to be having people testing the iterations of the code before it's released. So you set people to all sorts of work in order to solve the problem. When the problem is critical, the most important thing is that everybody understands it is their job to address that problem and to help solve that problem. And this makes a company, again, more responsive. It prevents you from overlooking problems. But if you see a problem that anybody feels is significant, you have to address it. And that is important to making your business progress. So now, that's the basis of the lean startup methodology. And I like to look at the lean business plan. You integrate the two. You look at how can we do a business plan that is, yes, it's structured, it's rational, it's premeditated. We do it in advance. But at the same time, it takes some of the elements of the lean startup in that it's responsive, it's incremental. It's built so that it acquires early feedback. It reduces resource waste. It allows fast but cheaper failure, and it assists better customer targeting. So one thing that I would say, and I suggest that you do this, look at the website Kickstarter.com. Now, this is a crowdfunding campaign, and crowdfunding is done where people contribute to products in order to get early versions of that product. And I did a great talk yesterday with the people who were here in Lausanne, showing them all the things that I had bought that were crowdfunded, one of which was this watch. So these are things that you do, and I can tell you that by selling, agreeing to sell 200 of something and advertising that this is your new product, it's a good thing. But if you look at Kickstarter campaigns and scroll all the way down to the bottom of the screen there, you'll see that they also address, what they're going to do going forward, what their risks are, what their barriers to entry are to competitors, how they're going to prevent competition, that they have patents, that they have rights. So use all of these things. Think of a business plan. Try and do as much of it as you can. Try and get people not only to answer questions about it, but ask them, would you right now pay money for it? And if you get them to think about, would they pay money before they answer their questions about what they would like to see, and then you are getting them focused on the fact that, oh, this is going to cost. This is something that I should think about in a financial sense, not just a cute what if sense. So these are the elements of what I call this integration of the two. Think about how you can put at least the principles of the lean startup into a traditional business plan. Plan it out, think about it before you make the leap, but then once you make the leap, you have the philosophy in your roadmap. Follow the philosophy. Don't spend time reiterating your business plan and working on that. Once you are off that cliff, you do everything you can to make your business plan fly. And let's see, Salim was asking, there are companies that rely on their brand, on their as their business model. Yes, making a strong brand is a great barrier to entry, but it takes time. A brand is something that you don't just develop instantly. If you can, it's wonderful, but don't rely on a brand as being one of your foundational elements. Brand requires customer loyalty, and loyalty takes both time and trust. And those are things that you have to work to build. And yes, brand and trademarks are the most valuable form of intellectual property. They will do the most for a company. Coca-Cola and Apple are two of the most valuable brands in the world, and they have generated more revenue just off of the brand because people are more inclined to buy their products, and that's been demonstrated. However, it takes too much time to rely on as a small business. So reputation, yes, but you build reputation first, and then that reputation contributes to your brand, which comes later. So yes, think of the importance of brand. Always be willing to not only represent your brand, but live your brand, be your brand. Everything that you do and that you say implies what the brand of your company is. And so that is important. I do know startups that work, people who are the voice, the image of their startup, and they are so iconic that they can drive their brand. And that is a good thing, but it still takes time. So think of your brand, believe in your brand, but you need to have a plan that will ultimately create value behind that brand. So those are the things that you need to think about. And so I just want for you to know that the key takeaways here are that you have to look at being an entrepreneur is about merging creativity and innovation in a structured manner for solving problems. And that way you need to define your problem, you need to search for the solution, develop the most promising idea, and execute. And this can take place in startups, but it's also common in big companies. And it's true, as I said last time, the idea is the key to your venture. And I want you to think about something. If you look at a tree that's 30 meters tall, that's a massive tree. But at one point, that massive tree was a seed that you could hold between two fingers. So keep in mind that your startup is a seed. Your idea is that seed, and keep working to build that. And a business plan and the whole process behind envisioning and executing your business is the nutrient and the water and all of the things that contribute to the success and the growth of your business. And so you need to make sure you translate that. And you go from a framework and actually use that framework to build on your vision. And so but draw from all sorts of different situations, different visions, but be open, be willing, and be responsive. Learn from all of your mistakes, all of the things that seem like failures. Remember, failure is not the opposite of success. It is a part of success. And so take that with you and think about how you can build off of experiences that are most often some element of failure into something better. So thank you very much. And I appreciate having the time and having the ability to answer some of your questions. It's been very enlightening. Next week, you will have Professor Mark Gruber, who will be giving you a webinar. And this is a special thing because he will also be with you in Muscat on the 13th of April. And he will be explaining to you about about his philosophy, his methodology, which is about where to play, market analysis, and how to work in the marketplace. So he will be there with you next on a week from Saturday. Christopher Tucci, whom you met last week, will be there on Friday. So on Friday the 12th, you will get Christopher Tucci. And so you are going to see some of our best knowledge, some of our most expert people there. And we're also working on a surprise for you of somebody who is a tremendous person for teaching you how to communicate and sell your vision. So thank you very much. It's been quite a pleasure, and I wish you a very good evening. So thank you very much, and good night.